We all want our lives to be good and healthy, right? Our emotional lives, our physical lives, our spiritual lives. We want it all to match up and be perfect. But the truth is that very rarely happens. Life is messy. Sometimes because of decisions we've made, sometimes of decisions people have made towards us, and sometimes, sorry, it's just life, and that's how it goes. Well, in today's episode of the Live Faith First podcast, we talked to John Ortberg, and his latest book, Steps, goes through the 12-step program. Now, keep listening, because this isn't just about being addicted to alcohol or drugs. This is about discipleship. This is about how we come to grips with who we are, with our emotional lives, how we have humility to view ourselves in healthy ways so that we can be better people for our families, for our communities, for our workplaces, and an amazing disciple of Jesus. So sit down and enjoy this episode of the Live Faith First podcast. We all want to be good. We want our health, our emotions, our spiritual life. We want it all to be good, even thriving, right? If you're like me, you're striving for balance and a certain peaceful equilibrium. Now, what you probably really like is vacation living 365 days a year, sitting on the beach, nothing but no cares in the world. But we know this isn't reality. Vacation life might get boring, although I'm probably willing to try. But anyway, the reality is that life doesn't give us peaceful equilibrium, and it's often in our own addictions, hang-ups, decisions that upset that equilibrium. Well, we have John Ortberg with us today to help us navigate how we bring God into our messy lives and end up on the other side wiser and better off for the journey. So, John, are you ready for this today?
I'm here, Elliot. Only time will tell if I'm ready, but I think in full disclosure, you should let everybody know that where I live is where you're headed for vacation time in a very short little while.
Yes,
So
it is true.
You're going to give it a shot.
I have a little senioritis right now. I kind of want to just stop working, but it's not Friday yet. So we continue on. Welcome to the podcast. I am so happy that you're here, that you've joined us. You talk about in your book, your latest book, Steps, about fainting during your early days of preaching. Mm-hmm. Now, we will get into that a little bit later, but that kind of sounds like, for a professional speaker, kind of an ominous start to your preaching career. But before we get into that, give us the cliff notes of your life. Where were you born? Where were you raised? Kind of how'd you get where you are today?
I was born in Rockford, Illinois, which is about an hour and a half outside of Chicago, and just a kind of vintage Midwestern, rather heavily Swedish community. I grew up there mostly during the 60s and 70s and liked growing up there a lot. Went to college in the Midwest and then came out to California to go to grad school. I was studying psychology and theology both. And so ended up going into the church world. I thought I was going to be a clinical psychologist, but I started seeing clients and I was not very good at it. And the longer I saw them, the unhealthier they got. So that's not a good sign. And then started working at church and really enjoyed that. I met my wife, Nancy, whom you know, California girl, and we got married. And so had been mostly in California since then. We spent about a decade in Chicago, which almost killed her, but mostly in California, raising our family, and now it's back to just the two of us.
All right. The good old empty nest, something we're quasi enjoying with our daughter in college. She still is coming home for breaks and summer. So we got about a month until she's home, and Here we got all that again, which we do love having her home, but it's just a different environment around the house.
It's, once they finally go, for anybody who's listening to us and thinking about that or looking forward to it, it is kind of like vacation. And, there's good in all directions with it and challenges in all directions with it. But you do kind of feel like after the weight of the care all those years, it is a little bit like, oh my gosh, we're on vacation. It's just us. We can do whatever we want.
Yeah. Yeah. And which is kind of odd because our 17 and 18-year-old daughter, when she was in high school, like It's not like we had to stay home to watch her. It wasn't like there was some sort of, oh, you better be home because, but
Mhm.
somehow when she wasn't here, we just felt this incredible freedom. So I'd love to get into your latest book, Steps. And you chose to use the 12-step program as your framework. Why did you choose the 12-step program as your launching point? What was it about that program that
Well, I've always
felt
been
like,
fascinated by it. I first got exposed to it way back when I was still in school, and just one of those meetings. For anybody who's listening to us that's been to a 12-step meeting, the level of honesty, openness, candor, rawness, people telling their stories, people cheering each other on, sense of urgency is there's a aliveness and an intensity to it that's very arresting
hmm,
and very fascinating. So I was always interested in it from that perspective. And then I found a writer, thinker, he was a philosopher in his academic career, named Dallas Willard, to be very helpful in thinking about God, faith, life, change. How do people change? Why is change so hard? And in several of his books, he talks about the fact that the 12 steps of AA essentially come from an attempt to rediscover or recapture, practically speaking, a life of discipleship in the modern world.
hmm,
And that if the church ever gets discipleship right, it will look a lot like the 12 steps. And then in times of deep pain in my own life, I found there was a kind of a depth to pursuing those 12 steps that I really needed.
hmm.
So there's a lot of streams that come together in it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. It's interesting when you think when I've thought about AA, kind of it's kind of well, that's where the really messed up people go.
Mm-hmm.
That's where like when rock bottom, you go to your AA program, your
Yep.
NAA program, whichever one it is. And after reading through your book, apparently that's probably the perfect place for me because there are so many amazing things to be drawn out of the 12 steps. So um, I do that often where I have preconceived ideas. I don't know if you've ever been to a grocery outlet. It is very cheap groceries,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or at least if groceries are cheap anymore, you can find them there. And I remember my wife telling me about it. I'm like, I'm too good for the grocery outlet. And then I went there and saw the prices and I'm like, never mind. This place is perfect. I
Yeah.
love this. So I'm a big fan. So I'm becoming a fan of the 12 steps. We start with step one.
Yep.
We are not going to go through all 12 today. So rest assured, everybody listening, John, you do not have to go through them. But the step one is we admitted we are powerless over alcohol and that our lives have become unmanageable.
Yeah.
Why is it important to start here? What it is about that primes us for our growth
Yeah.
journey?
And in the book, this is the only one of the 12 steps that uses the word alcohol in it. So anybody who's listening to us could substitute just our fatal attraction to do what is wrong. And I think if you defined addiction, Ian Cron in his book, The Fix, uh, wonderful and similar book about the 12 steps for everybody, talks about addiction as any substance or behavior that is mood altering and that has negative consequences, but we persist in it regardless. And I'm not particularly interested in how you define addiction and what does or doesn't count for addiction. I think addiction and sin are kind of overlapping categories.
Hmm.
What's interesting is that the 12 steps are a concrete, actionable, spiritual way of life through which, as a matter of empirical history, whatever you think about it or Jesus, a group of people actually got as a byproduct the freedom to be delivered into sobriety from horrible addictions. And that first step is very counter to what most of us think. Most of us, when we think about going to church or following Jesus, we think, oh, I got to try harder. I got to work more at being a nice person or read the Bible more or get more honest or try harder not to look at porn sites or try harder not to gamble or not to spend money or not to yell at my kids or something. And the first step is absolutely the opposite. It's to say, actually, I can't.
Hmm.
I am unable to change myself. Now, there's lots of areas in our lives where we're not powerless and we're able to do certain things, but this is part of where every human being is finite and every human being is small, and we are all sinners. We are all up against a spiritual power that is too much for us. None of us is in control of the universe or even when we're going to die. And it's very striking, Elliot. One of the guys that I was talking to about this, who has taught in AA circles for years. Interesting dynamic in AA is they don't have a formal structure. They don't have headquarters. They don't have officers. God said, my strength is made perfect in weakness. And I think addiction is a perfect picture of that. And it's actually the power of addiction, its destructive power, that keeps people's compass needle pointed the true north. Because if I get off track in this community, I'm going to drink and die or use and die. This fellow that I was talking to said that really the 12 steps are kind of a wisdom tradition. And he said the problem with most religions, with most wisdom traditions, with most churches is that we have a wimpy step one. We don't really deeply feel the pain of our powerlessness. And we don't really deeply feel like our lives are all that unmanageable. And he said, the problem is if you have a wimpy step one, you will have a wimpy steps 2 through 12. As you keep going through here, there's an intensity to the practice of these steps that is quite challenging. And you got to really, really want to do it. And if you know you're going to die, my alternative is I'm going to drink and die. If anybody goes to a meeting, they will hear folks say, hi, my name's John. I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a gambler, whatever it is. And they will know that person has gone through hell before they said those words. They did not want to say them, and they only said them because they knew they had to say them or they were going to die. And for most of us, the word sin doesn't carry that sting. It doesn't have that weight or that burden attached to it. And then, very much like you were talking about here, I thought that the 12 steps were just for people who were really messed up. And of course, one of the things we see in the Bible is it's people who experienced a really powerful step one who rushed to Jesus with open arms. And you constantly see this contrast, wimpy step one versus robust step one. So the woman caught in adultery, she had a real powerful step one. The guys that were going to stone her, pretty wimpy. Their lives were pretty manageable. Pharisee and the tax collector in the synagogue, the tax collector, very robust step one. Wouldn't even raise up his eyes to heavens, beat his breast, have mercy on me, O God, a sinner. The Pharisee, pretty wimpy step one. Thanks, God, I'm not like those other people. Story of the prodigal son and the elder brother. Prodigal son at the pig trough, comes to his senses, sinned against heaven, against you. It's a very robust step one. Elder brother, I've been at home working for you all this time. Over and over and over again in the life of Jesus and the stories of Jesus, you see somebody with a real robust step one. That's Paul in Romans 7. I don't understand myself. Why do the good that I would do, I don't do. Right. The bad things that I would not do, those things I do. What a wretched person I am. Or Isaiah in chapter 6 has this vision of God. Woe is me. I am a person of unclean lips. But most of us look at that and think, oh, I'm not that bad. There's other people that lie way more than I do. My wife swears a lot more than I do. I'm doing okay.
Right.
And so step one is the foundation for everything. And I believe it's the hardest step, especially for people outside of the field of addiction, because we have the luxury of not thinking that we're desperate for God. We all desperately need God, but that's where addiction becomes this strange gift. And in AA, they will sometimes talk about G-O-D, God, gift of desperation.
It is incredible. Kind of the moment you realize that you're not in control of things. That you're not in control of things. That things that you thought you controlled, you do not.
Yep.
And there's nothing like a middle schooler to remind you of that. If you thought you controlled your elementary child, then they will let you know, but fully. And I just love that idea that it is the foundation. When we start there, we're actually starting at that place of I've had to give everything over. Like there's nothing left to hold on to.
And I've thought about this a lot, Elliot. A lot of people who are following Jesus, a lot of churches these days are asking, what's the way of life or the discipleship pathway or the rule of life? There's different language around this, but in AA, they'll talk about AA basically is two things. It's a way and it's a fellowship.
Mm, mm,
Uh, a
mm.
way it's just a way of life. And the 12 steps, getting a sponsor, go to meetings, uh, and then the fellowship is that community. Well, originally, Israel was the fellowship and Torah was the way. And then those 12 disciples were the fellowship and the teachings of Jesus, following him around. That was the way. And then you have the Acts 2 community, and they devoted themselves to the, that's their way of life, and they were a fellowship together. Periodically throughout history, there'll be times when the Spirit moves, and once again, into any particular moment of time, culture, because things are always changing, there will be again the reemergence of a community of fellowship that has a powerful way. What's interesting is uh, it always comes to people who are uh, desperate or in great pain.
Mm, mm,
So
mm.
in our day, uh, the problem of addiction and the 12 steps, and so that is a way of life that began as a discipleship pathway. You will often find the way of Jesus to be transformative for people who are in prison, because it's pretty clear there. I'm in a lot of pain. Either I'm going to go this way, and if I go, I'm all in, or I'm going a real different way. People in great poverty, people where the church is persecuted. I was in Ethiopia years ago when it was under Marxist rule. The church there was a very vivid, vibrant community.
Mm.
People have gone through divorce sometimes, people who are suffering a terminal illness. The practices themselves, the 12-step involved practices like surrender and self-examination and confession to somebody else and making restitution and prayer and meditation and bearing witness and serving. The practices are not rocket science. We all know about them. Most churches really struggle to experience deep life change through them.
Mm, mm.
And ironically, paradoxically, the communities that tend to experience the most transformation through these practices are people who desperately know that they need them.
Yeah.
So all of that is around the centrality and just the inescapable foundation of the first step.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to move on to the 12 steps, fearless moral inventory.
Yeah.
And that seems terrible.
Mm-hmm.
At least while you're going through it, maybe on the other side of it. But it's naming your places where you've missed the mark, you've hidden, where you've been hurt. Why is facing the truth about ourselves such a crucial step in spiritual formation? I mean, why
Yeah.
do we start there?
Yeah. And another wonderful part of the 12 steps is that they're very tightly connected with each other. They're not random or arbitrary.
Mm.
It's not hard for people to go away and say, I'll read the Bible this much and spend this much time in solitude and serve this often. But there's not necessarily an organic, coherent way of life attached to that. And if somebody goes through the steps, one of the things they'll notice is they're all put in the past tense.
Mm.
Admitted we were powerless, came to believe a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity, made the decision to surrender, turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God. Why are they past tense? Well, because the founder, Bill W., and Dr. Bob, and about 100 other people actually did them for 4 years in this little Christian community called the Oxford Group before they ever got codified or written down. They worked first. And only after they had worked for several years did that group of 100 people or so say, my gosh, we have found this spiritual way of life that brings sobriety to hell-bound men and women. We got to tell people. So then they asked, well, what have we been doing? And that's what they wrote down. And so that's why it's important for people to realize they all fit together. It's not a smorgasbord. It's not like, well, I like step 2 and I like step 6. Don't care for step 4, so I think I'll skip that one. It's like,
right.
There's a coherence to them all. And after I'm just crushed, I'm powerless, I despair, then comes hope, came to believe. Then comes the surrendered act of the will, made the decision to turn our lives. And then the next step is I got to take inventory. And the reason I have to do that is if I don't know the truth about myself, I will never be able to walk together with God through the process of transformation. So, and of course, all of this comes from Scripture. A classic example here would be Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts. The fear inventory is a big part of step 4. See if there's any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting.
Yeah.
And so this inventory is something that I don't do on my own with all the steps. I do it with God's help. I ask him to help me do it. Search me, God, and know my heart. Yeah. And then it has to be both fearless and searching. All these words are very important. Psychiatrist Scott Peck said one of the ways you can divide everybody up into 2 categories is everybody's either a neurotic or a personality disorder. And if you're neurotic, you blame other people you blame yourself for everything, even if it's not your fault. But if you're a personality disorder, you blame other people for everything, even if it is your fault. And of course, we can all be both. So it's got to be fearless so that I'm not afraid, if I look at this, God won't love me anymore, or I'll never be able to recover, or it'll be too crushing. Nope, God will be with me. God already knows. I don't have to be afraid, no matter how ugly it gets. I do not have to live in fear of the truth.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then it has to be searching, because the personality disorder in me wants to let me off the hook and not actually look at it and not say, did I do that? Did I lie in that way? Did I actually say that? And so it's got to be fearless and searching. And kind of the gold standard, and anybody who wants to know how to do this that's listening to us, they could just Google 4th step online and this would take them to it. But it's really genius. In doing a real thorough 4th step, I actually start by writing down all the people in my life and all of my resentments. Mm-hmm. So I'll write down my dad and my mom and my wife, Nancy, and my kids and my friends. And then as I'm able to remember it, when they did this, when they said this, and I resented it, and then there'll be columns, I'll write down what was it that they did that I resented? What did it threaten in me? My security, my reputation, my sense of esteem, my money. And then I write down, how did I respond? I withdrew. I gossiped. Whatever it was. And that's where I start to see where my faults lie. And part of the genius of that is, and I've tried this before, probably other people have. If I just sit and ask, what have I done wrong? It's a little hard to remember a real long list. And there's a real good reason behind that. And I had never thought about this, Elliot, before working through the 12 steps. If you step on my toes, I'm very aware of that because I feel the pain in my body and I carry it with me. If I step on your toes, you may tell me, but I don't feel the pain of it. So I don't remember it as much. I don't think about it. So I'm much more aware of the wrongs other people have done to me than the wrongs that I have done to other people by and large. So it's brilliant in the way that memory, pain, our minds and our bodies work. And so I write that down. Now, this will be many, many pages, and it will take a long time. It's another reason why you need a real robust step 1, because when you hit step 4, fearless and searching moral inventory, folks in AA will say that's the most productive step of all the 12 steps, because all of a sudden, when you come to that step, you'll want to clean the garage. You'll want to balance out your finances. Everything will look more appealing to you than doing step 4.
Yes. Procrastination kicks in, I'm sure, tremendously. I want us to switch over to forgiveness. Now, I'm going to try to keep this high level. I'm not sure I'm going to be capable of that, but I part of a fearless inventory has to do with forgiveness, whether it's forgiving others, forgiving yourself, and so on. Can we just start with why is forgiveness such an important part of our emotional, spiritual, even physical life. Like
Yeah.
what is it about forgiveness that's so freeing or damaging to us when we
Yeah,
don't do it?
it's really fascinating and interesting. And again, uh, so many connections between Scripture and the teachings of Jesus and AA. In what's called the Big Book of AA, kind of the wisdom book there that Bill W. and then others wrote. Uh, when they talk about doing a fearless and searching moral inventory, resentments is where they start, and they talk about how resentment is the number one killer,
Mm.
and that those of us who are addicts just cannot afford to indulge brooding. And it's very interesting when Jesus is going to describe a life well lived, a righteous life in the Sermon on the Mount. The very first topic that he starts with is resentment. You have heard it said, you shall not kill. And then he starts walking through, if there's broken relationship, if there's resentment, leave your gift at the altar and approach the other person. So I think um, because the will is so central to personhood, you know, the kingdom of God is the range of God's effective will. The kingdom of Elliot is the range of Elliot's effective will. That's where your say goes, starting with your body. That's your little kingdom. So that's our will, are just core to who we are. Anger is what we experience when our will gets thwarted.
Hmm. Hmm.
When our will is frustrated, you just think about this. If you want something or somebody gets in front of you in traffic or sends it, anytime my will gets thwarted, anger is what I will experience. And that's not a problem. That's just a signal something's wrong and needs to be fixed. But very quickly, I move from just that to, I want to hurt you. And instead of love, which is the central command, which is that I will your good and want to be connected with you, resentment is, I will your harm. And so, and want to be disconnected from me. So it's anti-love. It's like the
Hmm.
opposite of
Hmm.
love.
Hmm.
So, and the only healing for that, for resentment, for bitterness, all of that is unforgiveness inside me. And the way that it gets healed is through forgiveness. So,
Hmm.
because it is the most central part of personhood, wills and thwarted wills. And it's the opposite of the ultimate command, love your neighbor as yourself. Uh, it's hard to see how forgiveness could be more central to human healing and redemption.
Yeah. 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 That's good. It's like you're driving around in the car with me because you're absolutely right. You get cut off and
Yes. And
it's
we've
not
all
the
been there.
feeling here. It's the feeling that comes out of my hands and my mouth. That's where we get
We
into
have,
trouble.
I have a good friend, and I won't quote it verbatimly, but her little child was in the back seat of the car and said, Mom, how come every driver is called? And then he said the name of a common name. It's quite a short name, because when she would see drivers and get mad at them, she would say you, and then she would call them that name. So her kid thought every driver was named that. And yeah, we all know that feeling very well.
Yes, yes. I thought maybe paying my daughter every time I dropped an F-bomb while driving would cure that. And it
Yeah,
didn't. I just
yeah.
owed her a lot more money. So
That's
until I
right.
finally decided I'm
Yeah,
just not giving her any more money. We're changing somehow. Can we talk about self-forgiveness a little bit?
yeah,
So, a lot of course, these steps is making amends in other relationships, but there's something about making sure we're okay
yes,
before we go out. And
yeah,
so, what is self-forgiveness? I have a lot of negative thoughts about myself where I don't forgive myself for stuff I've said or done or acted. Do you have any, how do we do that? What's that kind of process look like?
yeah. Um, you know, uh, it's interesting, Elliot. Anytime I talk about forgiveness and then get to self forgiveness, the interest level goes way up. I think probably all of us just wrestle deeply. I'll wrestle with this when I'm seeking to be with God in the morning, and I'm so aware of inadequacy, failure, ways that I'm not the person that I want to be, that it's just very hard to navigate, even trying to be close to God or feel grateful or express things to God. There'll be a voice inside me that says, well, yeah, you say that, but the truth is, this is who you are and this is what you do. And um, we're so complex and there's so many layers to us and so much junk in there and stuff not to like. So uh, I think it's helpful to think about um, self-love and self-forgiveness. What is self-love? A guy who's written on this really well talks about the fact that self-love is very different than self-indulgence.
Mm, mm,
Um, Again, to love is to will the good. So if I love you, I will not. I don't just will for you to be pleased all the time. I will for you to become the best Elliot that you can. And of course, sometimes that will involve pain, and sometimes that might involve me inflicting pain on you because I say, Elliot, here's what I see. And so in self love, it's the same thing. It's not being self indulgent on myself or soft in that sense. It's uh, I have to will. That's why I need to love my neighbor. I mean, I need to love myself and love my neighbor as myself. You know, Jesus was real clear on this kind of
yeah.
stuff. I have to will that I become the person that God wants me to be, which is
Yeah.
at the core of what love does. And that I am
Mm,
willing to exert myself with God's help to move in that direction. And that also means that uh, people sometimes say the bad boy of mental or emotional health is rumination.
mm,
And just where I spiral, I obsess over thoughts, I spin out, whatever kind of pictures. When we all know what that's like. Somebody says something mean to me, and I just rehearse it over and over again. Can't get it out of my brain. There's an obsessive quality to it. And a part of forgiving you, one piece of it, there's a guy named Ev Worthington has written wonderful stuff on forgiveness. Uh, but a part of the process, the journey of forgiving is I get to the point where I say, from now on, now that I have forgiven you, I will no longer ruminate over the wrong that you may have done to me.
mm.
And that as soon as I become aware of my mind and my thoughts starting to do that, I will let go of that. I'll ask God to help me. I'll talk with somebody else. I'll find another topic. I'll read something. I'll pray. I'll go take a walk. And the same thing with self forgiveness. Part of
Yeah.
what that involves is a commitment to no longer ruminate
Mhm.
over my inadequacy or my guilt.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so uh, now I'll need to learn from it. So that's where uh, step 4, that fearless and searching moral inventory, is so important. And it's interesting, we were talking step 1. Step 1 needs to be as deep an emotional step as it authentically can be. Uh, it's not real helpful if I just abstractly affirm I'm powerless without feeling it. I got to feel it because that's what drives me to God. Step 4 is not an emotional step. Step 4 is a very cognitive step. When you're taking inventory, you look at what's lacking. You also look at the good stuff, but you want to be really aware of it.
Yeah.
And part of the reason that moral inventory has to be fearless as well as searching is precisely because that condemning, punitive, rejecting voice destroys my connection with God, my sense of aliveness.
Mm.
And so that's where forgiving yourself, or another way of talking about that would be receiving forgiveness from God. I really think those are two different ways of talking about that same thing. Um, but that just becomes central to living a life of joy and power and hope. And part of what that means for folks who are listening to us right now is a commitment that I will no longer ruminate in a negative way about myself.
Mm.
Uh, when Paul says in Romans, there is now therefore no more condemnation
Mm.
for those who are in Christ Jesus. And the lack of self forgiveness always takes the form of self condemnation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of what Paul recognizes, and what the steps do in this journey as well. That they're just simply now in this kingdom, in this spiritual community, in this program, condemnation, including self condemnation, just does not have a place. It's not part of the program.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's super helpful. And I know I don't know how many years ago, 18 or so years ago, there was something that I was ruminating on against my wife, and it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't her fault.
Yep.
It was something that had happened long before she and I had even met one another. So it was nothing, it's nothing to bring up. There was nothing. And I felt bad about it. But yet, middle of the night, I would ruminate on this. And I talked to a friend, and he just said, you need to pray, God, I forgive Penny. And when he said that, I'm like, dude, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, but I had nothing else to go to. So there was nothing else there. So I'm like,
Yep.
all right, dude, I don't know if that idea works. Seems kind of dumb that I would be forgiving my wife for something that didn't. And just the power in that, just the power in stopping. And when the kind of that voice would start rolling to say, Lord, I forgive Penny for. And I
Well,
didn't
I
have to say it
mentioned,
that
if
many
anybody wants
times.
help on this, if you Google the name Everett Worthington,
Yeah.
Ev is the most prolific researcher I know on the topic of forgiveness, scores of studies. After he'd finished one book on forgiveness, somebody broke into the home of his 91-year-old mother and violated and then killed her.
Oh,
So he had to deal with forgiveness in a very profound way. And uh, he has workbooks, and I've done the short version and the long version, hours and hours and hours, and it's super helpful. Uh, and he uses a little acronym REACH. Remember, so when I remember, I think about the hurt, but I'm no longer rehearsing what the other person did wrong. I seek to remember it objectively, like a journalist would.
mm,
Uh, and then the E is for empathy. I put myself in the other person's place. And what was the other person thinking, and what was going? Why did what they do or say made sense to them at the time?
mm,
And I did. There's a little open chair experience there. I was weeping when I did that one.
mm,
Um, And then the A is for altruism. I forgive not for my own sake, so that for my life can be more pleasant, but because I'm a person who needs forgiveness out of humility, and I want to forget other people. And then I get to the place where I'm ready to commit. Um, but it takes a while to get there, and that's where Ev will have things like you might just write down the date, and I've done that one also.
mm.
And then the H is you hold on to it, later on when the memory comes back up in painful ways. But part of what was helpful in that journey, and it gets Elliot to just what you were saying, is um, forgiveness is almost always complicated and messy.
Yeah, there we go.
So in your case, well, like, am I supposed to forgive her when she didn't do it to me? Um,
Right.
Usually in relationship, there's a number of people where like I needed to deal with unforgiveness inside me, but it wasn't clear because we were both involved in a messy conflict how much of the percentage is my fault and how much of it is their part. And I might go to them and say, I just want to let you know I have forgiven you. And their response would be, what in the world are you talking about? You forgave me. I'm the one that's got to forgive you. So it was real helpful to realize what I need to do is I need to deal with unforgiveness inside me.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean I have 100% clarity on how morally blameworthy you were. I just know there's resentment and bitterness and ruminating thoughts. And uh, Ev talks about how there's decisional forgiveness, where I make that decision that I forgive you. But there's what he calls emotional forgiveness.
Mm,
Emotional forgiveness is what happens when I see your face or I hear your name, my body doesn't produce cortisol anymore. And old synapses are not firing anymore. So it's at the physiological, neurological level. And the feelings that come up and the thoughts now are thoughts at least of compassion and empathy, if not closeness, but no longer bitterness or rage or hate. So
yes.
there's a journey to emotional forgiveness. And mostly it'll involve practices that Ev lays out that are super helpful, but it's dealing with the unforgiveness inside my body. And it
Yeah.
was very helpful to me to get clarity on that and to realize I don't have to be clear on to what extent have you done stuff that's morally blameworthy? Or was the hurt that you did aimed at me or was it aimed at somebody else? If there's judgment, self righteousness, resentment, bitterness inside me, then I have to go through a process of forgiveness because it's really about being released from unforgiveness.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Now, throughout your book, there's this theme of humility that's just kind of woven through. This invites honesty, community, transformation. But we live in this world that does not look up to humility. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
probably if we found a way to remarket that with a new name, it would probably go better. But how do we cultivate humility without slipping into that shame or self-content or kind of that, more maybe negative self-talk is maybe a kind of misconception of humility. So how does humility play into all of this here?
Yeah. It's a really interesting topic. There's a historian, John Dixon, who writes about how in the ancient world, like among the Greeks and the Romans, humility was not a widely admired character trait. Uh, and that really it was Jesus of Nazareth, and particularly the notion of Jesus, God, voluntarily dying the death of a defeated, humiliated slave on a
Yeah.
cross
Yeah.
that made humility a virtue that has come to be admired. But it often gets lost. I think, in the Bay Area, Silicon Valley, uh, the Stoics are often widely admired, and the Stoics were not big on humility. It's like, develop an iron will that's able to continue to pursue success no matter what. Hustle, yep, we admire that one. Grit, yep. Um, so uh, again, it's a strange gift of addiction. Uh, uh, as soon as arrogance enters into the picture, I'm at risk. Uh, Addiction is mysterious, cunning, baffling, as it says in the big book. And it's like you can be fighting against it every day for a year, and then you just let your guard down for 5 minutes, and all of a sudden, and next thing you know, you're so there's this very a line that I love in AA's big book is when it's writing about how we can never rest on our laurels.
Hmm.
Um, we have at best a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And so part of what you see is in 12 step communities, they just don't tend to produce elder brothers in that prodigal son story. Because as soon as you start moving towards grandiosity um, and you're wrestling with an addiction, the addiction is going to win. And the difficulty in the church is our very desire to pursue becoming a better person, more righteous, more truthful, and so will very quickly lead as a next step to pride and self righteousness. And somebody gets serious about their spiritual life, so they start to pray every day. And then the next step is, well, Elliot, what's your problem? How can you can't pray every day like I do?
Right.
And of course, again, that's the story of the Pharisee and the tax collector. And then that pride actually makes the Pharisee much worse off than if he didn't pray at all. He'd have been in much better shape if he wasn't fasting and tithing. And so,
Hmm.
uh, humility really is not at all about running yourself down. It's not about having bad self esteem or trying to convince yourself that you're inadequate or you don't have the gifts that you do. Humility is just awareness of reality. It's all it is.
Hmm.
It's awareness of reality. And, an old way of talking about that, uh, it's not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. It's
Yeah.
being free to think about other people and life and the goodness of it, and my self-consciousness quotient goes down.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think if we can really come to understand what humility is, it's just awareness of reality, a decentering of the self that keeps me dependent on God. It actually makes life a much more joyful thing,
Yeah.
not a servile, cringing thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, John, as I read through your book, I was impressed that probably should admit this, but I have not read every one of your books. So maybe your other books carry all of this, but there was a significant amount of wisdom that you just rolled through that book. Just whether, and it seemed to me, and there's just humbly looking from the outside in, kind of like that that Hebrew 12, no discipline is fun in the time, but there is a harvest of peace and righteousness at the end of that. And so as I read through it, my brain kind of kept circling back to Hebrews 12, just that thought. Do you have a lesson or two that you've gained that if you could go back to your younger self or somebody that's starting on the journey that you would say, and you can choose anything if it wants to be around discipleship or maybe some things you learned with steps or something in your life, but what's kind of, do you have a kind of a big wisdom piece that you're like, yeah, this is a good one that I really wished I would have implemented when I was in my 20s or 30s?
Yeah, for sure one of them would be, as folks listening to us may know, if they're very familiar with recovery, 12-step, all that sort of stuff. And again, just for everybody to know, this is not a recovery book. It's just a discipleship book. It's just about how do you follow Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
There's 1,000 sayings in those circles because they want to be about life change. So they want to express everything as simply as possible, not because it's simplistic, but because it's just got to be available and accessible to everybody. And one of those little sayings is, your mess is your message. And so when you go to a meeting, you'll just hear people talk about, yep, here's my mess, here's my mess, here's my mess. And not just here is what it was back then, but here it is today. Yeah. I lied today. I yelled at my kids today. I stole from the office today. I looked at this website today. Whatever it is, there's a lot of real-time confession. Kent Dunnington wrote a wonderful book on addiction and virtue. And he says part of the power in those groups that gets lost in the church is that they understand that the recognition and public confession of personal inadequacy is itself a spiritual achievement that needs to be ritualized and celebrated. And I wish I had known earlier on the importance of the recognition and public confession of my personal inadequacy. And I think I tended to kind of feel like, because I'm involved in church work, which is a form of ministry, we're all invited into ministry, tended to think I would do that more out of my gifts and my strengths. What's very clear to me now, having gone through a lot, is when I meet people on the field of my failure and inadequacy and pain, we meet in a much deeper place than if I try to meet with them in what I know and what I can do. And so that your mess is your message, and the importance of the celebration of the recognition of personal inadequacy. I wish I would have come to that sooner.
All right. That's a heavy one. That is,
that's another one that, in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, celebration of personal inadequacy is
not high on the list.
Yeah.
No, I shouldn't even admit this, but as part of my preparation for a podcast, I listened to a book and I pulled weeds in the yard. And I got to be honest with you, just the idea of reading a book during the middle of the day, even though this is my job,
right?
It was over like, is this actually work? Because you pull weeds on the weekend. You don't pull weeds on a Monday afternoon, right?
Yeah.
So, and the personal inadequacy goes well beyond picking weeds. So I'm just, anyway, John, we're almost done here. And I almost failed to ask you about your fainting when you preached. So can you just tell, so what happened? First couple of times you got up and you just keeled over?
On, when I was pretty young, getting up in front of people and talking kind of happened, and I always enjoyed it a lot. I found myself feeling quite alive in it, and so as I was going through grad school, I started to do that, and I thought this could be a good thing to do with my life. And but then I was preaching one day, and at the church where I was now working part-time, First Baptist Church at La Crescenta, about 10 minutes into the message, didn't feel like it was going very well. I started to feel kind of dizzy. And the next thing I do, I was just laying on the ground. I had fainted dead away in the middle of my own sermon. And I thought, well, that's just an odd irregularity, never happen again. A lot was going on. It was finals. Nancy and I were about to get married. We were going to go live in Scotland for a year. So I thought, there's a lot going on in my life. But I did all those things, came back to school and to that same church. And the very next time I got up to preach, I fainted dead away again. And it was horrible. And I would have people come up and say, "Oh, Pastor John, you just need to relax when you're up there. Just trust God." Oh, thank you so much. That never would have occurred to me.
Right.
And, so I saw a doctor. I saw Arch Hart, who was a psychologist, stress dots, and like, how do you manage stress and all that kind of stuff. And wanted some guarantee that it would just go away. Never got that one. For that first summer, when I was preaching again after the second time, among other things, I would literally just take a chair with me onto the platform and set it down next to the pulpit. We had pulpits back in those days. And then if I felt that feeling coming back on, I would just sit down. And so it was like saying to everybody, I'm a really weak person. And so again, kind of personal inadequacy. And it's another little parable. You don't stop fainting by trying really, really hard not to faint. Actually, recognizing that weakness and being able to talk about it, being kind of comfortable with it, naming it, inviting it, let other people know about it, is a much better way of dealing with it than white knuckling it and trying by sheer willpower. Yeah. Not that I'm not going to do it. I won't think that thought. And again, it just comes back to so often we receive power from beyond ourselves through surrender, through indirection, through humility, through community. That's where power and change comes from.
Yeah. I love that. Well, John, first off, thank you so much for your latest book, Steps. I appreciate it. It is a great book. I encourage everybody out there, go grab the book. It is based on the 12 steps, but as we've said multiple times, this is not just about alcohol or that addiction. It's about discipleship, how we follow Jesus, and how we have an emotionally healthy life. Really, it helps us to navigate even through our own emotional life. So I encourage you to get that. And so, John, thank you for being here. Really, really appreciate it. For everybody out there today, let's go live faith first.
Thanks, Elliot.
Hey, you guys are still here. I know that means you enjoyed that interview with John Ortberg. Was that not a fun conversation? Seriously, you should go buy the book. It is a really strong book. It would be helpful. All right, here's the one thing that I'm thinking about. What's that thing that you kind of like, I'd rather not talk about that just would be better if it saw the light of day? Maybe it's like we talked about, if you live in a place where your work ethic and working 80 hours a week is all there is, and you're like, man, I only work 40 hours a week, just admitting that. Not that that is bad, but in some places that's like, man, you're working part-time. Maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's something deeper. We'd love to know, what's that one thing that would do better if it saw the light of day? So put it in the comments below. If it's really, really personal, just put a thumbs up there saying, I'm going to do something about it. So, all right, everybody, thanks for joining the Live Faith First podcast. And of course, let's all live faith first.